Black woman inherits floating restaurant, walks in and discovers a chilling secret. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, wedged between bills and grocery store flyers like it belonged there. Mariah Lewis almost threw it away with the junk mail until she noticed the elegant watermark and her name written in fountain pen ink across expensive cream paper. Ms. Lewis, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Cyrus Blackwood. As per his will, you are the sole inheritor of his establishment, the Velvet Dock. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Hartwell and Associates, Estate Attorneys. Mariah stared at the letter, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Uncle Cyrus. She hadn't seen him in over 15 years, not since that awkward family reunion where he'd shown up in a three-piece suit that cost more than her car, speaking in riddles about feeding the right people and knowing what they truly hunger for. Her mother had always called him the black sheep of the family, brilliant but strange, successful but secretive. That man sees opportunity where others see problems. She'd whispered after he'd left that reunion early, slipping away like smoke. 3 days later, Mariah found herself standing on a dock in the Chattahoochee River, staring at what had to be the most beautiful restaurant she'd ever seen. The Velvet Dock wasn't just floating, it was floating with style. Rich mahogany gleamed along its exterior, brass fixtures caught the afternoon sun, and floor-to-ceiling windows promised intimate dining with a view of the water. Ms. Lewis? A tall man in an impeccably pressed uniform approached her. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile was the kind that made you wonder what he was really thinking. I'm Dario Moretti, head waiter. We've been expecting you. Mariah shook his hand, noting how his grip lingered just a moment too long. It's beautiful. I had no idea Uncle Cyrus owned something like this. Your uncle was a remarkable man, Dario said, his accent carrying hints of old-world elegance. He built something very special here. Very exclusive. As they walked through the restaurant, Mariah's trained eye, sharpened by years of food styling and cookbook writing, took in every detail. The dining room was intimate, with only 12 tables, each set with crystal that caught the light like diamonds. The kitchen was a masterpiece of efficiency, with equipment that must have cost a fortune. We serve only the finest clientele, Dario explained, leading her past the main dining area. People who appreciate discretion and quality above all else. That evening, Mariah decided to observe the dinner service from the small office overlooking the dining room. She watched through the one-way glass as guests began arriving, men and women dressed in clothes that whispered money, their jewelry catching the candlelight like captured stars. At first, everything seemed normal. Elegant diners perused menus, sipped wine, and engaged in quiet conversation. But then she noticed something odd. A woman in a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Mariah's annual rent leaned toward their waiter and whispered something. Not her order, she whispered a number. 73. Mariah could just make out through the glass. The waiter nodded and made a note, but instead of heading to the kitchen, he walked to Dario. They exchanged words, and then the woman was discreetly escorted through a door Mariah hadn't noticed before, a door that blended so seamlessly with the wood paneling it was nearly invisible. 15 minutes later, the same thing happened with a distinguished gentleman in a navy suit. He whispered, 41, to his waiter, and like the woman before him, he was led through the hidden door. Mariah's heart began to race. In her years of working in high-end restaurants and catering exclusive events, she'd never seen anything like this. Guests weren't just ordering food, they were ordering something else entirely. She tried to follow the pattern, counting the guests who whispered numbers versus those who ordered normally. Roughly 1 in 3 engaged in this strange ritual, and each time, they disappeared into that hidden room for exactly 30 minutes before returning to their tables with satisfied smiles and mysterious packages wrapped in black cloth. When Mariah tried to ask the sous chef about the private room, the young woman, Lonnie, according to her name tag, just shrugged and said, I only cook what's on the regular menu. The special orders, those are handled differently. What kind of special orders? Mariah pressed. Lonnie glanced around nervously. The kind that keep this place running. The kind that made your uncle very wealthy. After the last guest left that night, Mariah cornered Dario in the main dining room. The chandeliers cast long shadows, making the elegant space feel suddenly ominous. "What's behind that door?" she asked directly. Dario's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. "Which door, Ms. Lewis?" "Don't play games with me. The door guests keep disappearing through. The one where they whisper numbers instead of ordering food." "Ah." Dario straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed calculated to buy time. "That's part of our loyalty program. Very exclusive. Your uncle called it the Connoisseur Club. Members who've been with us for years get access to special experiences." "What kind of experiences?" "Rare wines. Vintage spirits. Dishes prepared with ingredients that are difficult to acquire through normal channels." His voice was smooth as silk, but Mariah could sense the careful editing in his words. "Your uncle believed that true luxury meant offering what others cannot." Mariah felt a chill run down her spine. "And the numbers they whisper?" "Member codes. Each number corresponds to their preferences, their history with us. It's very sophisticated. Your uncle was quite the businessman." That night, Mariah lay awake in the small apartment above the restaurant that had apparently been her uncle's residence. The space was elegant but sparse, like a hotel room occupied by someone who never quite settled in. She found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events. The whispered numbers. The hidden door. The way staff avoided her eyes when she asked direct questions. The black packages guests carried away with secretive smiles. Whatever Uncle Cyrus had built here, it was more than a restaurant. It was something that thrived on secrecy, on the kind of exclusivity that made people willing to pay premium prices for experiences they couldn't get elsewhere. As she finally drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in her mind: what exactly had she inherited? The next morning brought new mysteries. Mariah found herself watching the staff more carefully, noting how they moved with practiced precision, how they communicated in glances and subtle gestures. This wasn't just a well-trained team, this was a group of people who shared secrets. And now, whether she wanted to or not, Mariah was part of whatever those secrets were. She thought about her comfortable life in Atlanta, her successful food styling business, her cookbook deadlines. She could sell this place, take the money, and return to her normal life. But as she stood on the deck watching the river flow past, she realized that normal was no longer an option. Uncle Cyrus had left her more than a restaurant, he'd left her a puzzle. And despite every instinct telling her to walk away, Mariah Lewis had never been able to resist a good mystery. Especially one that might be worth a fortune. 3 days of pretending to be a casual observer had taught Mariah one thing: everyone was pretending right back. The staff smiled and answered her questions about wine pairings and seasonal ingredients, but their eyes held the careful blankness of people protecting something valuable. So she stopped asking and started investigating. The restaurant's computer system was her first breakthrough. Uncle Cyrus might have been secretive, but he'd been thorough in his record-keeping. While the staff prepared for lunch service, Mariah locked herself in the office and dove into the POS system. The regular menu was straightforward: elegant dishes with premium ingredients, priced for wealthy clientele. But buried in the system's deeper files, she found folders that made her pulse quicken. Seasonal set, harvest line. And most intriguingly, private collection. Each folder was encrypted, but Uncle Cyrus had apparently trusted family more than she'd realized. Her birthday, the same birthday he'd remembered with expensive gifts throughout her childhood, unlocked every file. What she found made her hands shake. The seasonal set wasn't food at all. It was a catalog of rare items, first edition books, vintage wines from defunct vineyards, art pieces from private collections, designer jewelry from estate sales. Each item had a number, the same numbers she'd heard whispered in the dining room. Harvest line was even more shocking. These were items that couldn't be found through normal channels: banned books, controversial artwork, artifacts from closed museums, wines from embargoed countries. The prices made her gasp. Some items were selling for more than her annual income. But it was the private collection, That made her realize the true scope of Uncle Cyrus's operation. These weren't just rare items, they were impossible items. A signed manuscript from a reclusive author who never given autographs. A painting supposedly destroyed in a warehouse fire. A bottle of wine from a vineyard that had never exported to the United States. Each entry included notes about provenance, but the sources were coded. Instead of auction houses or dealers, there were cryptic references. The collector, bridge source, northern route. Mariah was so absorbed in the files that she almost missed the sound of footsteps on the deck above. She quickly closed the programs and pretended to review invoices as Dario appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Lewis, there's a delivery for you," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "For me? I didn't order anything. It's marked for the restaurant. Perhaps you should sign for it personally." On the dock, a nondescript white van waited. The driver wore no uniform, carried no company identification, and handed her a clipboard with forms that contained only symbols and barcodes. No readable text anywhere. "What company are you with?" Mariah asked. The driver shrugged. "Just making deliveries, ma'am. Sign here." The boxes he unloaded were unmarked except for those same mysterious symbols. As Mariah watched him drive away, she noticed he'd covered his license plate with mud, too perfectly, too deliberately. "What's in these?" she asked Dario. "Kitchen supplies, I assume. Your uncle handled all procurement personally." But Mariah's years in food service had taught her to recognize kitchen deliveries. These boxes were too small, too carefully wrapped, and they didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, Dario directed the other staff to store them in a restricted area she'd never seen, a storage room accessible only through the hidden door. That night, Mariah made her decision. If she was going to understand what she'd inherited, she needed to see what was behind that door. She waited until the restaurant closed, until the last staff member left, until the floating restaurant settled into the quiet rhythm of water lapping against its hull. Then she slipped from her apartment and made her way to the dining room. The hidden door was locked, but Uncle Cyrus had left her more than files, he'd left her keys. The brass key marked with a small anchor fit perfectly. The door opened onto a narrow staircase leading below deck. Mariah's phone flashlight revealed a space she hadn't known existed, a climate-controlled storage area that took up nearly half the restaurant's lower level. What she saw made her gasp. Wooden crates lined the walls, each marked with numbers that corresponded to the encrypted files. Some were open, revealing contents that should have been in museums or private collections. First edition Shakespeare folios. Vintage wines worth more than luxury cars. Art pieces she recognized from newspaper articles about missing works. One crate contained jewelry that sparkled even in her phone's dim light, pieces that looked like they'd belonged to royalty. Another held rare musical instruments, including a violin that bore the unmistakable craftsmanship of a master. But it was the newest crate, one that must have arrived in that afternoon's delivery, that made her realize the true scope of the operation. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, were items that took her breath away: a signed photograph from a famously reclusive celebrity, a bottle of wine from a vineyard that had burned down decades ago, and a small painting that she could swear she'd seen in a news report about a recent art theft. Mariah's hands trembled as she photographed everything with her phone. This wasn't just a restaurant with exclusive clientele, it was a front for something much larger. Uncle Cyrus hadn't just been serving food to wealthy guests, he'd been operating a sophisticated marketplace for items that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal, between available and impossible. The whispered numbers weren't just member codes, they were item numbers. Guests weren't just ordering food, they were ordering pieces of history, art, and luxury that couldn't be acquired through any legitimate channel. As she made her way back upstairs, her mind raced with questions. How had Uncle Cyrus acquired these items? Who were his suppliers? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do now that she knew the truth? She was no longer just the inheritor of a restaurant, she was the owner of a secret empire that traded in the impossible. Sleep eluded Mariah that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glittering contents of those storage crates, items that belonged in museums, private collections or police evidence rooms. By dawn, she'd made a decision. If she was going to understand this inheritance, she needed to understand Uncle Cyrus himself. His office became her archaeology site. She'd barely glanced at it before, dismissing it as the typical workspace of an eccentric businessman. Now she examined every detail with new eyes. The mahogany desk was pristine, its surface holding only a fountain pen, a leather desk pad, and a single orchid in a crystal vase. But the real secrets, she suspected, lay hidden. She ran her hands along the desk's edges, feeling for hidden compartments like she'd seen in old movies. Nothing. She checked behind picture frames, under drawers, inside books. Still nothing. Then she noticed something odd about the desk itself. One drawer was slightly shorter than the others. The false back came away easily once she found the hidden catch. Behind it lay a narrow compartment containing 3 leather journals, each bound with a different colored ribbon: black, red, and gold. The black journal was Uncle Cyrus's handwriting at its most careful, meticulous records of legitimate business operations, supplier contacts, and financial records. Normal restaurant owner documentation. The red journal made her hands tremble. These were the real records. Names, dates, and transactions that painted a picture of an underground network that spanned continents. Uncle Cyrus hadn't just stumbled into this business, he'd built it systematically over 20 years. The key to our success, he'd written in his precise script, is understanding that we're not criminals, we're facilitators. People desire what they cannot have through conventional means. We provide access to dreams. Entry after entry revealed the philosophy behind his operation. He saw himself as a curator of the impossible, connecting wealthy collectors with items that existed in the gray spaces between legal and illegal. A painting from a private collection whose owner wanted to sell discreetly. A rare book from a library that needed funds but couldn't officially deaccession. Wine from vineyards in embargoed countries, acquired through connections that predated restrictions. The restaurant provides perfect cover. Another entry explained. Wealthy clients already expect privacy, exclusivity, and high prices. Adding our special services feels natural to them, like discovering a hidden menu at their favorite establishment. But it was the gold journal that revealed Uncle Cyrus's true genius, and his growing concern about what he'd created. I've spent 20 years building something beautiful and terrible, read one entry dated just 6 months before his death. We began as a service for collectors seeking rare items through unconventional channels. But the network has grown beyond my control. Some of our suppliers push boundaries I never intended to cross. The entries grew more troubled as she read. Uncle Cyrus wrote about suppliers who brought him items with questionable provenance, artifacts that might have been stolen, art that disappeared too conveniently from private homes, historical pieces that museums claimed were destroyed but somehow found their way to his storage room. I've tried to maintain ethical boundaries, he'd written. We deal only in items where ownership is ambiguous, where sellers have legitimate claims, where buyers understand they're acquiring pieces with complex histories. But some of our contacts don't share these principles. One entry made her blood run cold. Dario brought me a proposal today that I immediately refused. A client wants to commission the theft of a specific painting from a private collector. Not acquire something already stolen, actively steal to order. This is exactly what I feared we might become. I told Dario that we're curators, not thieves, but I saw something in his eyes that worried me. He's been talking to our suppliers without my knowledge. The final entries revealed Uncle Cyrus's plan to legitimize the operation or shut it down entirely. He'd been researching legal ways to operate an exclusive private auction house, working with lawyers to structure something that could satisfy his wealthy clients' desire for rare items while staying within legal boundaries. If something happens to me before I can restructure this business, I pray that Mariah has the strength to either legitimize it or end it. She has integrity I've compromised in myself. The restaurant is profitable enough to survive without the special services, but the network we've built will not go quietly. There are too many people making too much money. The last entry was dated just a week before his death. I've decided to tell Mariah everything when I see her next month. She deserves to know what she'll inherit and to make an informed choice about what to do with it. The network can be beautiful, connecting passionate collectors with items that bring them joy. But it can also be corrupted into something dark. The choice will be hers. Mariah sat back in the leather chair, her heart pounding. Uncle Cyrus had never gotten the chance to explain his world to her because he died suddenly, a heart attack, the lawyers had said. Now she understood why he'd left everything to her instead of selling the business or giving it to his experienced staff. He'd been looking for someone with the moral clarity to make a choice he'd been unable to make himself. But as she processed this revelation, footsteps on the deck above reminded her that she wasn't alone in this decision. Dario and the rest of the staff had invested years in this operation. The suppliers Uncle Cyrus mentioned had built their livelihoods around the network. The wealthy clients expected their exclusive access to continue. And according to the journals, some of them wouldn't accept change gracefully. As morning light streamed through the office windows, Mariah realized she wasn't just inheriting a business decision, she was inheriting a fight between different visions of what Uncle Cyrus had built. The question was, which side would win? Armed with the knowledge from Uncle Cyrus's journals, Mariah knew she couldn't navigate this alone. She needed allies among the staff, but choosing the wrong person to trust could be dangerous. The journals had made it clear that not everyone shared her uncle's evolving moral compass. She decided to start with Lonnie, the sous chef who'd seemed uncomfortable when asked about the special orders. The young woman was in the kitchen early the next morning, prepping ingredients for lunch service with the focused intensity of someone who loved her craft. "Lonnie, can we talk privately?" Mariah asked, glancing around the empty kitchen. The sous chef looked up, her knife pausing mid-chop. "About what? About what really happens here? The special orders. The private room. All of it." Lonnie's shoulders sagged as if she'd been holding her breath for years. "I wondered when you'd figure it out. Your uncle said you were smart. You knew him well? He hired me straight out of culinary school 5 years ago. Told me I had talent but needed to learn discretion." Lonnie set down her knife and leaned against the prep counter. "At first, I thought the private dining was just for VIPs who wanted custom meals. Then I realized we weren't cooking for those guests at all. How did you feel about that?" "Conflicted." Lonnie's voice was barely above a whisper. "The pay was incredible, better than anywhere else I could work. But I became a chef to create beautiful food, not to be part of whatever this is." Mariah felt a spark of hope. What if things could change? What if we could still serve exclusive clientele but do it legitimately? "You mean shut down the auction side?" Lonnie's eyes widened. "Dario would never allow that. He's made too much money from commissions." "Commissions?" "He gets a percentage of every sale. The bigger the item, the bigger his cut. Last month alone, he made more than I make in a year." Lonnie glanced toward the dining room nervously. "He's been talking about expanding the operation, bringing in more suppliers, taking bigger risks." Before Mariah could respond, Dario himself appeared in the kitchen doorway. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were sharp. "Ms. Lewis, I've been looking for you. We need to discuss tonight's special arrangements." "What arrangements?" "A very important client is coming. Someone who's been waiting months for a particular item to become available. The ivory chess set from the Romanov collection." Mariah's blood ran cold. She'd read about those chess sets in Uncle Cyrus's journal, pieces that had been reported stolen from a private collector in Moscow. Her uncle had specifically refused to handle them, noting that they were too hot, too traceable. "I'm not approving that sale," she said firmly. Dario's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Ms. Lewis, with respect, you don't understand how this business works. We have commitments to our clients. Backing out now would damage relationships that took years to build. Then we'll have to rebuild different relationships." "I see." Dario's voice remained pleasant, but the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately in your office." Mariah felt Lonnie tense beside her. "I think we've said everything we need to say." That evening, Mariah called a meeting with the senior staff. She'd spent the afternoon reviewing Uncle Cyrus's legitimate business records, preparing her argument for transitioning to a purely legal operation. The numbers were encouraging. The restaurant itself was profitable enough to survive without the auction income. But as she outlined her vision to the assembled team, she could see the division forming. Lonnie and 2 other kitchen staff nodded along, clearly relieved at the prospect of legitimacy. The sommelier, an elderly man named Henri, seemed intrigued by the possibility of legally acquiring rare wines through proper channels. Dario, however, sat with his arms crossed, his expression growing darker with each point she made. "This is a mistake," he said when she finished. "Your uncle built something magnificent here. You're proposing to turn it into just another upscale restaurant. I'm proposing to turn it into a legal business that won't put us all in prison." "Prison?" Dario laughed, but the sound was harsh. "Ms. Lewis, we provide a service that wealthy people desperately want. We connect passionate collectors with items that bring them joy. If we don't do it, someone else will, someone with fewer scruples than we have. And when the FBI comes calling? They won't. We're too careful, too discreet. Your uncle understood that." Mariah stood her ground. "My uncle's final journal entries suggest he was having serious doubts about the direction this business was taking." Dario's mask finally slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "Your uncle was getting old, getting scared. He was losing his nerve when he should have been expanding. I've been trying to show him opportunities he was too frightened to pursue." "You mean like the Romanov chess set?" "Among other things." Dario stood, his movements deliberate. "I think you need time to reconsider. This business supports 8 families. Are you really prepared to destroy their livelihoods over moral squeamishness?" The next morning, Mariah learned just how serious Dario's opposition was. She was carrying a tray of coffee down to the office when her foot caught on something, a loose floorboard that had been perfectly secure the day before. She tumbled down the narrow stairs, the tray clattering as she hit the wall hard before landing in a heap at the bottom. Her shoulder ached, and her wrist throbbed where she tried to break her fall. But more than the physical pain, she felt the chill of realization. This hadn't been an accident. As she sat on the floor, examining the suspiciously loose floorboard, she heard footsteps above. Dario's voice drifted down the stairs. "Ms. Lewis? Are you all right?" "I heard a crash." His tone was perfectly concerned, but Mariah noticed he didn't seem surprised to find her at the bottom of the stairs. And when she looked up at him, she saw something that made her blood freeze: satisfaction. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. "These old boats can be dangerous," Dario said, extending a hand to help her up. "Perhaps you should be more careful." The message was clear: back down, or face the consequences. But as Mariah looked into Dario's cold eyes, she realized something important. She wasn't just Uncle Cyrus's niece anymore. She was the owner of this operation. And if someone was willing to hurt her to protect their profits, it meant she was closer to the truth than they wanted her to be. The fight for the soul of the Velvet Dock had begun. The bruises on Mariah's shoulder served as a daily reminder that she was no longer dealing with simple business disagreements. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to hurt her, which meant she was threatening something valuable. That realization transformed her fear into determination. She spent the next day installing discreet security cameras throughout the restaurant using equipment she'd ordered online. Tiny devices tucked behind picture frames, under tables, and in corners where shadows provided perfect cover. If someone was going to make another move against her, she'd have evidence. The cameras proved their worth that very evening. Mariah watched from her apartment as Dario held a private meeting with 3 people she didn't recognize: 2 men in expensive suits and a woman with the kind of jewelry that didn't come from any legitimate store. They gathered in the private dining room after hours, speaking in hushed tones over a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The audio was fuzzy, but she caught enough to understand the conversation's direction. The strangers were suppliers, the people Uncle Cyrus had grown increasingly wary of in his final months. They were discussing expanded opportunities and new inventory sources. That made Mariah's stomach turn. One phrase came through clearly: The niece is a problem. She needs to understand how things work, or we'll need to work around her. Dario's response chilled her. Give me a few more days. If she won't see reason, we'll explore other options. Mariah saved the video to her laptop and backed it up to the cloud. Whatever happened next, she'd have evidence of the conspiracy forming against her. The next morning, she called Lonnie into the office and showed her selected portions of the recording. They're planning to force me out, Mariah explained. But I'm not going anywhere. I want to restructure this business legitimately, and I need people I can trust. Lonnie's face was pale as she watched Dario discussing other options for dealing with Mariah. What do you need me to do? Help me build a new team. Uncle Cyrus's journals mentioned that this operation could be restructured as a legal private collectors club. Instead of selling stolen or questionable items, we'd curate exclusive experiences around properly sourced collectibles. Over the next 2 days, Mariah and Lonnie quietly approached the staff members who'd seemed uncomfortable with the current operation. Henri, the sommelier, was immediately interested in the possibility of legally acquiring rare vintages through proper estate sales and auction houses. 2 servers who'd been with the restaurant for less than a year admitted they'd been looking for other jobs because they didn't want to be involved in anything illegal. We could still serve exclusive clientele, Mariah explained to her growing alliance. But instead of trading in gray market items, we'd offer curated dining experiences with legally acquired collectibles. Wine tastings with properly sourced rare vintages. Dinners paired with art exhibitions featuring pieces from legitimate private collections. Literary evenings with first edition books acquired through estate sales. The more she talked, the more excited she became about the possibilities. This could be something beautiful, a place where wealthy collectors could share their passions without the shadow of illegality hanging over everything. But first, she had to deal with Dario. She chose her moment carefully. The Romanov chess set was scheduled for delivery that afternoon, and she knew Dario would expect her to back down when faced with the disappointed client and the lost commission. Instead, she was waiting in the main dining room when he arrived with the client, a thin man with pale eyes who looked at the restaurant like he was calculating its worth down to the last fork. Mr. Petrov, Dario said smoothly. May I present Ms. Lewis, the new owner? Petrov's handshake was brief and cold. I trust there will be no problems with our transaction. I'm afraid there will be, Mariah said calmly. We're not proceeding with the chess set purchase. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Petrov's pale eyes narrowed. Excuse me? The Velvet Dock is transitioning to a new business model. We'll no longer be handling items with questionable provenance. Questionable? Petrov's voice was dangerously quiet. Mr. Moretti assured me that everything was arranged. Dario stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Ms. Lewis, you're making a terrible mistake. Mr. Petrov has been a valued client for years. Then Mr. Petrov will understand our desire to operate within legal boundaries. Petrov studied Mariah for a long moment, then turned to Dario. It seems you've lost control of your establishment. He walked toward the door, then paused. This is disappointing. Very disappointing. I hope you'll reconsider before you force us to find alternative arrangements. After Petrov left, Dario's professional mask finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you've just done, he snarled. People like Petrov don't just walk away when they've been promised something. You've put everyone here in danger. The only danger here comes from continuing to run an illegal operation. Illegal? Dario laughed bitterly. You think legality matters to people like us? You think your high moral principles will protect you when Petrov decides he wants what he was promised? Mariah stood her ground. Here's what's going to happen, Dario. You have a choice. You can leave quietly with a generous severance package, or you can stay and work under the new structure. But you will not threaten me again, and you will not operate your private network out of my restaurant. Dario stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating his options. Finally, he smiled, the cold, professional smile she'd grown to hate. I'll take the severance, he said. But you should know that you've made enemies today. People who won't be as reasonable as I've been. I'll take my chances. That evening, as Dario packed his personal items and said goodbye to the staff members who were leaving with him, Mariah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She'd won this battle, but something told her the fight was far from over. Still, as she stood on the deck watching the sun set over the river, she felt something she hadn't experienced since inheriting the restaurant: hope. The Velvet Dock could be something beautiful, something legitimate, something she could be proud of. She just had to survive long enough to make it happen. 3 months later, the Velvet Dock sparkled like a jewel on the Chattahoochee River. Mariah stood at the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived for the grand reopening, and felt a pride she'd never experienced before. This was her vision made real: luxury with integrity, exclusivity without secrecy. The transformation had been remarkable. The hidden storage room now served as a climate-controlled wine cellar, stocked with rare vintages acquired through legitimate estate sales and auction houses. The private dining room had been redesigned as a curated exhibition space where guests could dine surrounded by rotating displays of art, rare books, and historical artifacts, all properly sourced and fully documented. "Mariah, this is extraordinary," said Margaret Chin, the food critic from Atlanta magazine. "I've never seen anything like this concept. Dining as cultural experience." Tonight's event showcased everything the new Velvet Dock represented. Guests enjoyed a 7-course tasting menu while surrounded by first-edition cookbooks from the 1800s, borrowed from a private collector who was delighted to share his passion legally. Each course was paired with wines that told stories: a Bordeaux from a vineyard that had just opened its private reserves to the public, a champagne from a producer who never exported before but trusted Mariah's new transparent approach. Henri, now head sommelier, moved between tables with obvious joy, sharing the genuine stories behind each bottle. Lonnie, promoted to head chef, had created dishes that complemented not just the wines but the historical context of the evening's theme. This is what Uncle Cyrus dreamed of, Mariah thought, watching her guests engage with both the food and the cultural elements surrounding them. Connection, passion, and beauty, without the shadows. The reviews would be spectacular. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's critic had already compared the experience to dining in a private museum where every item has been chosen for both its beauty and its story. Food and Wine magazine had booked a feature story about the restaurant's unique approach to high-end dining. But the real validation came from watching her new clientele. These weren't people seeking forbidden thrills or gray market treasures. They were collectors, historians, and food enthusiasts who appreciated the stories behind beautiful things. They paid premium prices not for exclusivity based on secrecy, but for experiences they couldn't find anywhere else. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed with satisfied smiles and business cards for future events, Mariah found herself alone in the restaurant for the first time since the reopening. The silence felt different now, peaceful rather than ominous. She was reviewing the evening's receipts when she noticed something unusual. On Uncle Cyrus's desk, which she'd kept largely unchanged as a tribute, the small crystal vase that usually held a single orchid was slightly out of place. When she moved it back to its proper position, she felt something shift beneath the desk pad. Lifting the leather pad revealed an envelope that definitely hadn't been there before. Her name was written across it in Uncle Cyrus's distinctive handwriting, but the paper looked newer than his journals. Her heart racing, she opened it carefully. "My dear Mariah, if you're reading this, you've made the choice I hoped you would make. My attorney was instructed to place this letter here only if you successfully restructured the business along legitimate lines. I couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands if you'd chosen differently. I always knew you had the strength I'd lost somewhere along the way. Watching you tonight, yes, I've been watching through arrangements I made with people who cared about doing the right thing. I see that you've created something far more beautiful than what I built. I was never prouder to be your uncle than I am right now. You've turned my compromise into your triumph. The dock is yours now, not just the business, but the dream of what it could become. You've made it real. With all my love and respect, Uncle Cyrus. P.S. Check the cigar box in my bottom drawer. I saved something special for the chef who would finally serve food worthy of the Velvet Doc's true potential. With trembling hands, Mariah opened the desk's bottom drawer and found an ornate wooden cigar box she'd somehow missed in all her previous searches. Inside, wrapped in silk cloth, was a leather-bound recipe collection that took her breath away. These weren't just recipes. They were Uncle Cyrus's original creations, dishes he'd developed during his early years as a chef before he'd opened a restaurant. Each page was filled with detailed notes about techniques, ingredient sources, and personal stories about the inspiration behind each dish. Some pages included photographs of the finished plates, showing food that looked like art. The final page contained a note. These were created with love, not profit. Use them to feed people's souls, not their secrets. CB. Mariah clutched the recipe book to her chest and felt tears streaming down her face. Uncle Cyrus hadn't just left her a business to fix, he'd left her the tools to create something magnificent. These recipes would become the foundation of the Velvet Doc's new signature menu, dishes that told stories of heritage and craftsmanship rather than hidden transactions. As she sat in the peaceful restaurant, surrounded by the evidence of her successful transformation, Mariah finally understood what Uncle Cyrus had really given her. Not just a floating restaurant or a complicated inheritance, but the chance to prove that success didn't require compromise, that luxury could coexist with integrity, and that the most exclusive experiences were those built on truth rather than secrecy. The Velvet Doc was no longer a front for hidden dealings. It was a celebration of everything beautiful that happened when passionate people shared their treasures openly. And Mariah Lewis, inheritor of secrets, had become the curator of dreams made real. Outside, the river flowed peacefully past, carrying away the shadows of the past and reflecting the bright lights of a future built on solid ground. The chilling secret was gone, replaced by something far more powerful: hope, integrity, and the promise of many beautiful evenings to come. The transformation was complete. The Velvet Doc had found its true calling at last.